studies show that one of the fastest and most effective ways of learning something is to teach it to someone else. Researchers at Stanford once got a group of 62 teenagers and they gave them the task, using a computer program, of learning about the biological changes that occur when a person has a fever, and then to create a little flow diagram showing the processes involved and the relationships between them. Now, the kids were randomised into two groups. So one group were the study as normal group. They were asked to study and learn the material in the same way that you would study and learn anything. But the second half, they were assigned teacher roles. They were told that the diagrams they created would be used to teach a virtual character who appeared on screen as a wee cartoon. Now, the results were absolutely astonishing. Those assigned the teacher roles learned much more, and they learned the material much more deeply and scored much better than the normal study group when tested on the subject material. But maybe one of the most incredible parts of it was the least able people, the least able students in the teacher group, matched the performance of the highest achievers in the normal study group. Isn't that absolutely incredible? The researchers called this the Protégé Effect, and it's since been replicated loads and loads of times, suggesting that that learning by teaching someone else is maybe one of the most effective ways of learning something, even more than learning by rote, or even better even than mind mapping, which a lot of people do. And the question is, how does it actually work? Well, it seems to work in two kind of ways. The first part is about responsibility. Like when we know that we're learning something to teach someone else, we take far more accountability for getting it right, for making sure that we get the facts right, for also closing the gaps in our knowledge and making sure that the assumptions we make are actually correct assumptions. And even looking at the brain, studies show that when you learn to teach, it seems that the knowledge seems to be embedded much more richly and deeply into the brain. Now, I can personally attest to this because this is what I do and what I've always done. Let's say when I'm writing a book chapter and I've got lots of scientific studies I'm reading through and opinion pieces, and I've got all this stuff there that I need to create into need to understand it richly so that I can create something for someone else to learn from. And what I actually do is I get up from my laptop and I start walking around my office and I pretend I'm talking to a fake audience. Now, there's an advantage to pretending you're talking to a fake audience. If it's a real audience, you become a wee bit self-conscious, especially when the following happens, because very quickly, when I'm imagining I'm presenting to a fake audience, very quickly I realise that there's loads of gaps in my knowledge and stuff that I thought I knew. It turns out I don't know as well as I thought I knew. And what happens then is you start rambling. And you're going round and round. And the reason you're rambling is because you're trying to hone in on a point that you don't really understand well enough. So then what I do is I go back to the source material and I'll check it. I've got, right, didn't get that the first time round. Okay, then I'll come back and do it again. And now I'm closing the gaps in my knowledge a little bit, and I'm finding other bits I'm not sure of, and I'm still rambling. And then I'll go back again. Maybe I have to look broader than the source material. Maybe there's something else that I need to check to close so that I understand something a wee bit better, so that I can explain it a bit more simply. And what happens is I make connections that I would never have made had I not been up doing this. And then I do it again. I go back up, I present and realise again, I'm getting better, but I'm still unsure of a wee bit, making a few errors. I'm not sure about that. Back to the material, learn a wee bit more, come back, and it's an iterative process. In fact, sometimes if I'm having to not just learn the stuff so that I can write a book chapter, but then go and give a talk on the subject at a conference, I've found myself speaking at a conference and someone will come up to me and say, wow, that was absolutely amazing how you took that complicated subject and you made it so simple and you didn't even use any notes. And I smile to myself, not out of pride, but I'm smiling because I'm thinking, you've no idea what went on in the background for me to get to that point. I went through about 10 iterations. People see the final point, but that's the point of it. You can get to that final point where you're spending 10 minutes rambling, trying to explain something, to 90 seconds of something that's really quite slick because you've captured the key points and the relationships between them. And that takes a wee bit of iteration. So that's called the Protégé Effect. And it really is, from my own perspective, I would say it really is, in my opinion, For me, it's been my best way of learning something really, really quickly. Now, another thing I do is I challenge myself sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I say, could I now explain that to a child, maybe an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old? And then I find again that the point I just got to, that's okay for adults, but maybe maybe the heavy lifting's getting done with a couple of big words, and I thought, God, and then I have to expand a wee bit, I have to go wider and pull in concepts that I hadn't really thought of, and I thought, wait a minute, I don't think I understand it as well as I thought. And it's another layer of learning and understanding to go a bit deeper, so that I can understand, to explain something to a child, you need an even deeper level of understanding than if you're explaining to an adult. You can get away with some things with an adult, but if you want to explain it correctly to a child, you need a deeper knowledge. And so I use that to challenge myself. That's actually been scientifically tested. Researchers back in 2016 gave people the task of imagining that you're explaining the gun control debate to a 12-year-old. And that's exactly what they found, is people, rather than sticking to their own opinion, they went wider. They went broader and started bringing in opinions and making connections and explaining things a lot more with much greater articulation than those who were just tasked to just explain it to someone else, like an adult, for example. So anyway, that is the Protégé Effect. Give it a wee try for yourself. You know, actually, a fun fact here, some computer programmers use a version of this called, I think it's called the rubber duck debugging, where they actually put a rubber duck there and they go through their code to debug their code. They go through the lines of code line by line and explain each line to this rubber duck. And it sounds a bit kind of daft, but what they're actually using is the Protégé Effect, because sometimes you just say something or write something down without really thinking about it. But when you have to think about it and explain it, it causes you to learn it better, and you understand not only what it is, but why you do what you do. And it's called rubber duck debugging. But anyway, I'm assuming whether you're a computer programmer, give that a try. But if you're not, and you just want to try the Protégé Effect, find something that you want to learn and do exactly what I've just talked about. Get up and pretend you're teaching it to someone else. Walk around and pretend it's an audience, and then you realise that here's the gaps in my knowledge, here's the assumptions I'm making, here's the facts I'm not quite clear on. Go back and correct them, come back up and articulate, and do that as many times as you think you need to, until you feel you've really understood the subject very, very well. So, you know, some people even try this by using putting the voice activation on ChatGPT and actually asking ChatGPT to be the audience or the virtual character and explain it to ChatGPT. It doesn't really matter whether it's a real person, a virtual character, ChatGPT. The act of articulating itself is what helps us to realise what we're missing in our explanations, and it closes the gaps in our knowledge, lets the brain embed the knowledge and understanding much more deeply, and gets us to a place where you really do understand the subject surprisingly quickly.